Good morning and welcome to Book Tastings. I'm Jessica, and today we are going to be reading a portion of Northwind by Gary Paulsen. If you're not familiar with the author, he wrote Hatchet, which was a Newbery Honor winning book, and this book right here, Northwind, was published a few months after his passing in October of 2021. So without further ado, we have Northwind by Gary Paulsen. The Saga of the Sea Child. And it came to pass he was born of a woman of the sea, born of a sea woman with a blood clot held tightly in his tiny fist, a sign to tell of hardship and danger in the life to come from the tiny fist and clot, and the mother of no remembered name did die birthing the boy, and the father also of no remembered name had passed to Valhalla fighting a whale, and as there was no other named family, the boy was born an orphan, alone, to live alone on the docks, a dock boy, a wharf boy, nursed by sucking rags dipped in sour goat's milk and fish oil, fed on scraps others would chew to soften, dressed in yet more rags with crudely carved wooden shoes, always half naked. He was that boy, and they called him the wharf rat and named him Leif, for no other person on those docks had that name, and when he was old enough to walk, they took him on the boats. For all his young life he was passed from one boat to the next, to the next, to the next. No longer the wharf rat named Leif, but a boat rat named Leif. And when he could use his hands, they set him to repairing nets, sewing ripped nets, torn clothing, and sharpening the seal-killing harpoons, beating him with wooden rods if he did them wrong. And they made him cook greasy eel meat that the sailors would eat, claiming it was soft and would be easy to puke when they became seasick, across one ocean into another ocean, then north, looking not for whales, which were too hard to kill, but for seals, for their grease meat, and furs, always after furs. For seal furs shine like gold pieces, always north, where the seal fur was thickest and made for better warmth, and the boy grew and was 5 summers, then 6, then 8, and 10, and 12 summers taken on one boat, then another, and another, until when he slept in his dream story, it seemed like all one ocean. And when he came awake, it still seemed like one ocean, just as all boats seemed like one boat, and all eel meat, when he learned to puke, seemed like one meat, and all puke seemed like one puke, and all beatings seemed like one beating. And winters, the boy had winters where the freezing sea boiled in blown rage, and was sometimes so cold men's fingers would freeze black and have to be cut off, and the boy would rub oil on them to toughen the stubs, amazed that men could still work with almost no fingers. North, for the better furs that shined like gold, until they were north, had come in this boat north to turn east, in the giant straits and up into the forested wildness, and an isolated fish camp was set up where a small river came into the sea, where the ship left Leif, and 4 used up and part crippled old men, one named old Carl, and a small tall boy brought off a whaling ship on which a traveling wharfwoman had borne the child and passed, and after she was buried at the sea, the crew fed the small boy on fish sauce and sea milk cut from dead seals that had been nursing until he learned to walk. But with the woman gone, they wanted no children, and so sold him for a folded bolt of heavy sailcloth. And he was named Little Carl, for he had no other name. And in this fish camp they were to take salmon from the mouth of the river and smoke the meat, while the ship was gone up north outside the giant island looking for seals. For the seals were like gold in the sun, and this they did, taking and cutting hundreds of silver salmon and smoking their meat in hand-fashioned racks for days upon days, until they had enough smoked and dried fish to last a whole crew of a ship for at least 6 moons. And they waited for days upon days, and the ship did not return for them, would never return for them, for this was a bad coast with terrible ripping tides and unpredictable winds and rocky points where death was always waiting. And this they knew, and so came to know there would be no ship coming back from them, and that the ship and crew were gone to Valhalla, and they were alone. And they would have to leave this place by way of the sea. They had a small canoe, which they had used axes to carve from a cedar log, for working in the stream spearing salmon, but they were too many for so small a craft, and it was decided they should make a large dugout canoe to take them all, and had cut down a giant tree to roll drag into camp. And they would have done this, could have done this, except death found them. Men who have lost their shadows. Nobody knew exactly when the dark ship came, and to be sure, at first they could not see it at all, but only understood it was there in the thick fog by the smell. There was a drifting stink of death. A green dark stench of burned and rotting greasy death came out of the fog, up the rocky bank, over the cedar canoe, into the small bark shelter huts they had made, past and around and through everything, slithering into every nook until all the men who had been deep in safe sleep came awake, with the smell clawing into their every breath. Death smell. Death smell from a large wooden ship that rode heavy with the wind on dirty sails hanging now in sloppy stained loop folds, coming from and with and in the fog, so the dark and ugly ship seemed almost an extension of the fog itself. There was no wind, not a breath of it, and yet the boat had moved along and down channels from the open sea, coming in silence, dead silence, on the moon currents as the wild tides changed and pulled and pushed the silent drifting wooden ship until at last it came into the cove in front of the camp, seemingly of its own volition, and stopped. Meant but not meant, not planned to be there, but there, sending its death stink, the stink from blood-soaked decks and rotted gore and rendered fat, boiled off small whales, seals, dolphins, anything alive that had fat on and could be made dead, and the fat cooked out ahead of the ship like a silent, dirty scream of filth. But something else, too, the smell of dying, rotting men. For a time there was silence, none sound, a complete cessation of sound, not even a croak from the crows and ravens circling above the drying racks. Night moved away, and light came, and the fog dissipated slowly, streaking around and away in gray swirls until the source of the stink could be seen, sitting in the cove, squat, thick, heavy in the water, its bow nudging against the rocky pebbles of the shore. A silent horror. Then the men came. They were not clean. As crude and dirty and stinky as a ship, 4 men lowered a small workboat from the side of the ship and climbed down onto it. 1 man using 2 oars to push the boat to the pebble beach, and 3 climbed out with great effort, while the 4th held the small boat against the shore. Some in the camp later said of the men that they seemed to be made from scraps of parts of the ship, indescribably dirty, as worn as old wood, with their skin hanging from their bones, eyes red and deep in their sockets, and when they opened their mouth to smile a greeting, it could be seen that many teeth were gone. They were in some strange way not unkind, though their appearance was in itself offensive, but so weak they could hardly stand. It was not even clear what they wanted, as their language made no sense. One of the elders said later it was as if their tongues tripped in some manner on their sparse teeth, so the words rattled and could not be understood. Yet, one said, shaking his head while he stuttered more unknown words, waving generally in the direction of the sea. Da, another added, nodding, pointing away from the sea and towards the shore, towards something up on the shore near the forest. The sailor waving and pointing, so that the men in the camp, out of politeness, all looked up in the same direction, as intently as they could, but saw nothing. No part of the encounter was any better, made any sense. The weak men stood weaving slightly, and the men in camp stood watching them, and all was in silence, all in the tendrils of fog that still rolled back and forth, real but not real, there but not there, men but not men. Then the moon currents came once more into the cove and captured the ship, and it started to drift out of the cove, and the boatmen hurried as best they could, staggering and nearly falling, and went back into the vanishing ship, into the fog, into nothing, as if it had never been there, never been seen, or heard, or even smelled. Gone, never seen again. They were spirit men, said one man from the camp, and who was to argue with him? Fog spirits, ghost men from the dark world. And those who said such things looked away in quiet fear at where the ship had been, and they shivered as if a dark cold wind had come upon them, a dead wind, death wind. They are men who have lost their shadows, said old Carl, the eldest of the crew. They are men who have done some great wrong and have lost their shadows. He waved his hand to the sky places. They must search for their shadows to become men again, whole men. They must drift forever in the death ship, and because they will never find their shadows again. He did not finish as he did not need to finish. But the boy Leaf needed to know more and did not know how not to be rude, so he asked, "What happens because they cannot find their shadows?" "They will bring misery," old Carl said. "Misery. They will kill all joy and only bring misery with their foulness." And because old Carl was thought to be wise, everyone believed he was right, even though they would never see the death ship again, and the fish smoke fire drove away the smell of the ship, and the men dead stink. Even then they knew something bad had to come. Something from the dark places would come in like the fog. Something bad. And 8 days after the dark ship and men without shadows had gone, the first man grew sick. 2 men first. They became uncomfortably warm and then hot with a burning fever, and so weak they could not stand, and finally crawled into their huts to lie still and sweating, until vomit took them and they could only hold food or hot fish soup. The other men tried to feed them, and then not even water, and the vomit turned to blood. And the second day, even with what care they could be given, the ghosts left the bodies of the 2 men almost the same moment, and they died. Then the man who cared for them was hunted and found by the fever and went down and lost his ghost and likewise died. 3 of them, but it did not end. Instead, the sickness became like a fire roaring through the camp, and soon old Carl started to burn. Before he vomited blood, the old man took Leaf and little Carl and put them in the cedar canoe with some food and supplies and sent them away. "Go north," he said, pushing them as hard as he could from the shore. "The men without shadows made the air here sick with their poison. Head north where the air is not sick, and where the water channels are so small they will not let the death ships pass. Keep going north and never come back. Never come back to this place. Never." Yet Leif, who did not understand about not being rude, said, "But what of you? Can you not come?" For he loved old Carl in his fashion. If he found truth in himself, he admitted that he felt fear, deep fear, in going off from the camp into what wildness he did not know. "All who are here will pass over the bridge. I am already sick. The fever has not taken you and little Carl, and you must leave. Now, go away from this bad air, this bad dead place, and do not look back. Do not come back. Do not even think back. Go." And old Carl turned away from the shore and walked back into the camp, and the boy would always remember that he walked straight and tall, though he was walking to his end, to his journey over the bridge of life into the other Valhalla. Then the canoe caught the moon currents, which had turned and were heading out, and moved by itself around a point of forest that stuck out, and Leaf could not see the coast nor the camp any longer. That gives you a slight little hint of what to expect from this posthumous work from Gary Paulsen. Thank you for joining us for book tastings. I am Jessica, and hopefully we will see you again soon.